thing is, we look the same, but our conscience, our mindset are somewhat different.
Well, so do you see the supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
No, honestly, I don't think that.
Yes, folks. Left Reckoning 157 featuring David Griscom, and just an excellent job by that translator there. I don't know if Vlad put it quite so dismissively, but no, I don't think that.
It was really good. I mean, it is funny that, like, I guess it just hasn't gone far enough in Russia yet for Putin to have to completely embody the bit that they, people like Tucker Carlson are talking about demonic energies and rituals in the United States.
It seems like
he's not there yet.
Well, going back, and Egor's been someone who's looked into the synergy between the right-wing conservatives in America and conservatism within Russia, and I think you might have maybe overestimated the degree to which those cohere and are conversant with each other. Because one of the things is that, Tucker's kind of been, and that right wing has been freelancing a little bit when it comes to let's demonize China, and some of the other things they might want to suggest that their boy that they're championing it for anti-imperialist reasons or something. All of a sudden. Believes.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance when it comes to a lot of people in this country, at least, who lionize Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. But before we get to Russia's invasion of Ukraine with Egor, bring it back to our own country's complicity in absolute bloodshed. Hell. Honestly, what people are going through in Gaza, what children or just adult men, for that matter, are going through, unbelievable. And the only thing from some that punctures that hell is occasional food aid, sporadic and too late and tardy. But anyway, if you search Google for UNRWA, the United Nations organization that services Gaza and the refugee folks there, it is all New York Times, Wall Street Journal, those sorts of Times of Israel, talking about secret terrorist group, and the idea that even if there was proof that out of the thousands of people that work for the United Nations, a few might have connections with people associated with Hamas, which is a resistance group that engages in terrorist acts, but also does civil service stuff. It's still not an appropriate response remotely to cut off funding for that. Nonetheless, Christian Guru Murthy, Channel 4 anchor, talked to one of the people who should be locked up for doing propaganda on behalf of this genocide, Ilan Levy, IDF spokesperson, and pushed for any evidence of this, despite the fact that governments are already, included in our own, acting formally on the accusation that this aid group that is a life-saving organization for hundreds of thousands of people is actually a terrorist, and we need to pull funding right after the ICJ says it's plausible that the evidence we see in front of our eyes that Israel is committing genocide. So here's a little bit of pushback from Channel 4 in the UK.
There were huge consequences as a result of your naming of people who worked for UNRWA. What the world has not seen is the accompanying evidence. I just want to know, is there accompanying evidence? Is there anything beyond those names? And have you shared it with the United Nations investigation that is going on? Because there is millions of pounds of aid that is resting on those claims, and hundreds of thousands of lives dependent on it.
When we said that UNRWA, at least 13 UNRWA staff members, and that's apart from the thousands of UNRWA graduates, but the 13 UNRWA staff members were directly involved in the October 7th massacre. That was the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, do you have any
of
evidence
the complicity
for that?
and
That's
collusion?
my question.
Of
Because
course,
you haven't
because this
published
was
it.
all collected. Because this was all collected.
Just a bit of quantitative data. 30,000, over 30,000 personnel working for UNRWA.
Basis of intelligence that
Where's
has
the
been
evidence?
shared with our allies. Intelligence that has been shared with our allies. I'm
When
not
was
going
it
to come
shared
and
with
reveal-
Britain? Because Britain claimed it didn't know.
I can't speak to the specific intelligence that has been shared with individual Western partners, but that evidence is out there. It is clear.
Well, is
It is
there
not
direct
deflection.
evidence about those 13 names? Where is it? Have you passed it to the UN investigation or not?
We do not trust the UN
So you
investigation that
haven't.
is taking place.
So there is no
The
evidence
UN
that you have
cannot-
placed in front of anybody
the
investigating
the United Nations, which has been covering up the Hamas presence literally 20 meters underneath the UN headquarters in Gaza, cannot be trusted to conduct any sort of internal review.
Have you given the
because
evidence
UN is part
to
of
the
the
US
problem.
or British governments?
I'm not personally aware of what material may have been passed on between our intelligence agencies.
Exactly. So he's just completely lying, which is all Israel has been doing this entire time. And like I said, it's almost such a laughably small number that if that is the amount of people that Israel could plausibly accuse of having any connections with Hamas, a dozen out of 30,000, it's a fucking joke. The whole thing is a joke.
And just recognizing the struggles that they've had to even definitively link folks in the first place, right there, the kind of tiptoeing and dancing around the fact that, it doesn't seem like we have this smoking gun. But even as you were just saying, Matt, 13 people out of 30,000, does not make UNRWA like into some big conspiratorial, dangerous sleeper cell
It's
army.
actually pretty impressive. Considering
Yeah.
how embedded Hamas is not just like, oh, we do terrorism 24/7, 365. That's our business here. Hamas is on top of a resistance group, also like embedded in civil society. So that a massive, again, like it's the category error. It is that, first of all, it's like saying, look at all these Israelis who support guys who shoot up mosques. Which is a massive problem, not just within like regular Israeli society, but like leadership, and said like, okay, let's just go massacre people willy-nilly. Like that's like the sort of logic we're seeing here. It's really dark, and it really does. The images we see of Israelis flocking to the southern border to out of their fucking time, taking time out of their lives to go have raves to blockade as people starve and are bombed and turn limb from limb. That we're shaping up a pretty dark century, especially when you look at, this is happening on our southern border as well, let alone what's happening across Europe with regards to the Mediterranean. But it's sick, this UNRWA stuff.
No, it absolutely is. And, I think that having a representative of your government going on television and saying that, the United Nations is the problem. The United Nations is a part of the problem. I don't know. I think pretty explicitly shows what you are engaged in. And what your
Genocidal
relationship
intent
with the rest of the world. I mean, it's unbelievable to sit here and for these folks to talk in the way that they are. And directly waging war now on not just the human beings in Gaza, but on journalists, on aid workers, and in the most brazen way. I mean, I think as you just noted, that story about folks dancing and holding a rave to stop food and medicine from getting to children and human beings, shows. I mean, just not only how disgusting the kind of mindset of the average, or we shouldn't even say average, out of like a significant part of the Israeli population, but the perversity of it, right? Beyond just sort of saying like, hey, we have to do this nasty, inhumane thing, to win this victory, right? And, get our hands dirty, but the sacrifice is sort of worth it. No, it's like, let's turn this into a festival and a fun experience for us. I mean, that is extremely dehumanizing and nasty kind of thing. And you also have been having, these other stories, about, what are IDF soldiers doing with the empty kitchens that they're ransacking in Gaza? What kind of meals are they prepping on the road? I mean, just disgusting things on a daily basis, as everybody has known since the beginning of this onslaught.
And you search, you search UNRWA, first result, Wall Street Journal, UNRWA's not so independent investigators, as if fucking Israel is good at investigate. It can be taken at face value for investigating anything. I mean, unbelievable. Israel says, again, Times of Israel, Israel says UNRWA probe mandate into findings of staff partition in October 7 too vague. It's just like all UNRWA case reveals a much larger problem with humanitarian aid. Like pretty dark things happening because we are all paying attention and we can see this. But if you've never heard of UNRWA before and you decide to search that, this terrorism accusation, which is not substantiated, is completely obscuring anything else. Mm-hmm. The ICJ genocide stuff, this is, yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying, this is just, from the get-go, I think, at a certain point, you can talk about the individual atrocities, you can talk about whatever the news story of the day is, but you have to be aware of the Israeli propaganda playbook, and it's been from the very get-go, which is distort, confuse, distract, and this whole thing, a brutal thing that we're watching, is just another attempt at doing it right. Oh, what if instead of more coverage of the atrocities in Gaza, we get to see if maybe the New York Times will do an investigative piece just to see how bad the United Nations organization is in Gaza, right? How many terrorists do we think are actually in there, right? So what if that can be what the news story is for the week? And that it's just throughout, whether, earlier it's did Israel bomb a hospital? Or did they bomb the side of the hospital, right? Or did they mean to do it? Or was it an accident? All this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just a very constant stream of, if not just straight up disinformation, things used to muddy the water and distract the conversation so that people can have sort of fervent and loud debates about things, to sort of obscure the fundamental reality, which is Israel is engaged in mass slaughter of human beings with seemingly no end in sight. And no real strategic or political, not only justification, but reasoning at this point, other than just total war on a civilian population.
Yep. So, yeah, that's today in Zionist Lies. In Real Things, South Africa urges ICJ to consider action on Israel's planned Rafah assault. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, where we're at today. We felt important to at least note. It really makes me despair when I look at those search results. Barely a one that is, yeah, it's a dark world we're seeing develop, folks. Anyways, Egor Kotkin, Russian socialist in Moscow, stayed up late for us. We actually just finished that an hour or so ago. And here is this conversation, folks. And we will see you on the other side as we go to the post game. Welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me as ever, David Griscom. Hello, Dave.
Hey, brother.
And joining us now, Egor Kotkin. Egor is a socialist from Russia who you may have seen on The Hill, on Breaking Point's Matt Binder's Doomed podcast. Egor, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Happy to talk to you guys.
Really happy to talk to you finally. Maybe as a little introduction, I'm curious, you are currently in Moscow, is that correct?
Exactly, yes.
Talk about being a socialist in Moscow, over the past few years.
frustrating over the past few decades. I mean, the pendulum swings back too hard in the last 30 years. I mean, I'm kind of a newly minted socialist. I started as a liberal. I started from the right-wing perspective, actually. Just because when I was growing up in the 90s, as any young person, I was looking forward. I was progressive-minded. And my major mindset was that progressive-minded means liberal-minded, end of history, and whatever this weird boomers with red flags were doing, it's weird, it's bad. So my progressivism led me first on the right. I was liberal for a long time. I was even a libertarian. One of the reasons why I enjoy libertarian debates on Sam Sitter show so much is because I can recognize myself on the other side, and I hate it actually. But at some point, I just I was looking for the same thing, but at some point I just realized that the answers are not there on the right. So I just moved to the left, and I suddenly find out that I'm very much alone. There is no left infrastructure in Russia. There is no, even your left bread tube corner of the YouTube that is marginal in the bigger picture, but still pretty powerful and concise. It doesn't exist in Russia. There is very strong Redcon movement, red conservators who are the Stalinists in the worst way possible, who basically repeat American conservative rhetoric. They hate LGBT movement. They think that trans rights is a bourgeois plot to whatever. So they're very reactionary, but they identify with the former Soviet Union. And the new left, there are individual people like me who basically want the same thing that Bolsheviks wanted 100 years ago, but updated the current moment. And there are individual people, but you have to literally find individuals in the internet space of Russia, in the Russian-speaking internet space, and to bring it together somehow through YouTube, through Telegram channels, because there is no infrastructure. There is no concise left space for people who share socialist or communist views and of 21st century, not late 19th century. So yes, it is frustrating, but it is hopeful.
It's interesting. It strikes me that your sort of journey politically mirrors our David Griscom's a little bit too, from Austin, Texas, with the early reaction against liberalism. Isn't that right, David?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, no, I will say though, even though I was on the right for a while when I was younger, I moved very quickly from, I didn't really have a liberal phase, if that makes sense. I went from being on like the conservative GOP side to a socialist pretty fast, but no, it's interesting to hear. Well, I mean, I know we got like a lot of other things we wanted to get to, but I'm just curious if you could just give folks who might not have an understanding of this actually, where like working class organizations or institutions are at politically in Russia right now. Do they exist in the same way that they did under the Soviet Union? Are they politically active, or have they been sort of mirroring what's happened in, America and a lot of Western Europe, where trade union movements and things like that have sort of been on the decline?
Well, they definitely don't exist in the same way they existed in Soviet Union, because in Soviet Union they were co-opted by the state and party too much. They were unable to live on their own. Mm-hmm. So they basically, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, the previous worker unions infrastructure was dissolved too, and I can tell as a child of the 90s, the word Profsoyuz, trade union, worker union, was sounded to me like some absolutely meaningless bureaucratic term. It was so much empty of any meaning that has anything to do with worker democracy, worker autonomy, fighting for the rights. It was just part of the state that was basically distributing some benefits and bonuses from the state from top to bottom. exactly the opposite that worker union should be, like a bottom to top movement. So when Soviet Union died, it all died as well. And in the last 5 years, we seen organically rebirth of the worker movement in Russia, like the Profsoyuz Courier, which means delivery guy, because we have a robust delivery industry or whatever. Like you have Amazon, we have Ozon, like you have your food delivery services, we have the same in Russia. Our internet industry very much mirrors yours. And people, hundreds of thousands of people working here organized, but it's still very much devoid of ideology. People in some industries are able to recognize their common interest, economical material interest, but they're still averse of any ideological affiliation. And people from the old Red Guard are unable to speak to them because they are too much tied to the basically dead ideology, well, late Soviet form of this ideology. And young people are not yet involved in that. And so it just sparks of it. So at some point, eventually, worker movement will meet worker ideology. But right now, as I said, pendulum swing too hard in the opposite direction. So people even trying to do worker movement are afraid to basically identify themselves even before their own eyes or in their own minds as the left or moreover socialist and stuff. So it's all ahead of us.
And, I want to get sort of back into that a little bit more. But the occasion for us discussing this is Tucker Carlson, former Fox News, disgraced Fox News host, the current independent journalist, I talked with Vladimir Putin. And, I do want to get back to how Putin started with the the long-term history discussion that a lot of people are keen in on because Tucker was a little bit annoyed by that. But, you mentioned a couple times the 90s. And that's the part where I thought the interview started, my ears perked up at, because I just read Vladislav Zubak's Collapse about Gorbachev and the fall of the USSR. I'm curious about your perspective as somebody from the 90s in Russia. Your perspective on, Putin talking about how we expected a hand of friendship, maybe more assistance from the West in our transition from the USSR. As a socialist in Russia, what was your interpretation of that part?
As a socialist in Russia, I say this was the biggest news Putin broke for us, saying directly that late Soviet elite, part of which he was, definitely as a KGB colonel working in Germany, small part, low part, but still he was definitely from the Soviet elite. And he directly said, openly said the first in 32 years, that they basically sold USSR for the hope of becoming a part of Western global bourgeois elite. This was huge and left spaces in Russia, in Russian Telegram channels, in Russian Twitter. They all picked up on that because the thing that we knew all along, that we suspected all along, that basically Gorbachev sold the USSR for the glorious privilege to appear in Pizza Hut advertisement, or Yeltsin's and Putin sold USSR to hope become restore basically Russian Empire, become new aristocracy. And they were LARPing hard in the 90s and still LARPing as basically old Russian aristocracy. He confirmed it, and it was. I mean, we knew that all along, but it's nice to see that he realizes, and they, I mean, Russian bourgeois elite, understands what they did and why they did it.
Matt, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So yeah, let's back up a little bit. So ultimately, Tucker Carlson has this interview with Putin announced. I'm curious what your reaction to that was, going into it.
Actually, I was kind of excited because my main point that I'm pushing last 2, 3, 4 years. And on Twitter, like my overall project is to expose Russian-American conservative pipeline and basically explain to people how not Russia meddled in America, but basically Russia became an image of America, but a very specific image. If you have, like, imagine the thought experiment that if you had in 2000 when Putin became president, same year when Bush became president, if you had Republican taking all control over the Congress, over the Supreme Court, over the presidency, and holding on unilaterally for 24 years, you would not be able to distinguish Russia today with all anti-gay laws and anti-trans laws and police violence and stuff. You won't be able to distinguish it from America. I mean, you still have all the same things, but you have them contained to red states. You have them in contention with the liberal elites. If we have the dynamic, if like Republicans won completely, and Putin repeats American conservative talking points to ridiculous extent. In the first month of the war, he was complaining that John Rowling has been cancelled by the Western liberals. I mean, it was his justification, something about invasion to Ukraine. It basically sounded like Jordan Peterson, who also said the same thing, that because trans culture, trans agenda, cancel culture, therefore Ukraine should be invaded. And you can pick up on the in many details. It's not a coincidence. They are directly being fed by talking points from the American right, and they're basically implementing the dream of the American right in Russia. So,
what do you make? I know. Oh, go ahead.
No, I forgot where I asked. What was the question initially? Because I know I led somewhere, but I forgot the question. I mean, I was just gonna maybe follow up, like talk about. Well, I remember what I asked you. Like, I know you've noticed the MAGA communists we have here in America. I'm curious that I sometimes think like they're a distraction. I'm curious about your perspective on them. What do you think their significance is? In American context, I think zero. In Russian context, they remind me of the people I told you initially, red conservatives. Basically, they are quoting Stalin, Lenin, and Marx, but they also totally buy in the modern culture war agenda from the right-wing perspective. So between quoting Lenin, who was very radical on many social issues for his time, they are repeating absolutely regressive talking points of the modern American right, and it looks ridiculous. It looks out of place and out of time. But in Russia, at least, you can understand where it comes. It's boomers. They happen to be born in the more progressive society than the society they live right now. So history went back on them. So you can understand where they are emerged, how they emerged like that, with the partially progressive views from the past and regressive views from the present. In American context, I don't see any future or any, electorate for the base for that movement. It's just some kind of weird online LARPing, in my view.
Right, and yeah, I was just asking. What you say you were sort of pleased to see that at least Putin was going to be exposed because. And it sounded like you got what you were hoping for with him making that admission in regards to how the 90s played out.
I'm not. I didn't look for it like a gotcha. I just. I didn't expect him to be exposed. He exposed himself well in many respects. To me, it was. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. It was interesting in the sense that. The main international dynamic of the past 2 years is basically a fight between Russia and America. So it should have been interesting to see heterodox to say the best American journalist, not just liberal. I mean, if Putin was giving an interview to a liberal journalist, it would be useless, absolutely useless. We know what they would lead with. We know what they would want from this interview. Tucker Carlson, in terms of his American place and influence, I agree with you completely. I know how you feel about him, and I totally buy into it. But in terms of his place in Moscow, I think he was the best from American journalist with any recognition, situated the best to get something interesting from Putin, and he got it. In my view, in many respects, Putin was very open to him, and he said a lot of truth, in my view. And I'm not saying it in complimentary ways. Because like the truth that they basically sold USSR for cookies is not a compliment to Putin, but it was definitely a truth, and it was very informative. It was a highlight. It was terrible news, but it was also a highlight in terms of informative part of the interview. So I think not as a compliment to Putin, not as a compliment to Carlson, but the interview was great and very informative, and there are many points I could elaborate on in terms of what I learned.
I just want to start with the very beginning, which is Tucker sets up the NATO prompt, which we're all very familiar with, and Putin surprises him, I think, a little bit by going into deep history, including presenting him with some documents, to the point where Carlson asks a couple times, like, "What's the relevance here?" I'm curious, like, how did you read that, the opening?
I actually think it was very informative in a certain sense, as a window in Putin's thinking. I mean, and no one, as far as I can say, not in Russian space, not in American space, picked up on this detail. Here they think that his overall historical narrative is ahistorical drivel. It's like it's funny when people say it's like college level of history. Maybe for Americans, yes, when it's where you learn Russian history in college, but it's a 7th grade level of history. It's a narrative that I read in history books, in regular history books in school. This is a kind of narrative that I was, being a history buff, constructed around 7th grade. So it's very demented. And it's a historical, a materialist, idealist crap. But there was a very interesting moment because it was invented from the whole cloth. No, well, not from the whole cloth. It was invented. He was repeating after many Russian nationalist writers and his favorite philosopher, basically Russian fascist Ivan Ilyin and stuff. But because the narrative, anyway, completely invented by the right, you can see what he believes. Because when he highlights some things, he highlights it not because it's important from the historical point of view, but because it's important from his point of view. There was a moment around 8 to 10 minutes interview when he started talking about 17th century, and he presented the history of the conflict with Poland. When he was this folder with documents, original documents, tried to present Tucker. He presented this conflict when when Ukrainian Cossacks request Russia to take them from the Poland, to protect them from the Poland. Russia initially declined because they didn't want to fight to go to war with the West, with Poland. But 10 years later they started the war. War went for many years, and they eventually took over the east of the Dnipro River and Kiev. The way Putin told the story, and the fact that he was prepared to illustrate it with the documents, precisely this moment, it sounds very modern. Basically, if you look at this 2 minutes of him, 3 minutes, from 8 minutes to 10, 11 minutes, telling this story, you basically hearing him saying the same story that happened in the last 10 years. So there was a request from Donbass, save us from this Polonization, Westernization. And at first Putin was reluctant to answer to that request because it would lead to the war with the West. I mean, Poland in 17th century, USA right now. But eventually he came over, a long war, and then Russia takes over the eastern Ukraine and Kiev. So the way he told this story seems to me like he thinks we are living this moment right now. I'm not saying that he's right. I think it's again a historical, but I think this is the moment in history he's lacking. He's trying to recreate right now. So to me, at best, the most productive conclusion I can make from that he probably wants to, his plan maximum is to take over the eastern Ukraine, is to River Dnipro and maybe Kiev, but he's not looking to take over the entire Ukraine, leaving it to the future generations of Russian leaders. The same way he said that this job was ended last time by Catherine the Great, 100 years later than after the Tsar Alexei.
You know, we haven't discussed much the decades leading up to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I'm curious your contextualization and how much emphasis you can decide how much you want on the Orange Revolution, Euromaidan, the Donbass violence. You have the floor.
Well, I'm not actually an expert in Ukrainian history. I had to become one in the last 2 years, and I'm not happy about it. But I can tell that I became more critical. More I learned about Ukraine, I became more critical of it. Not far from justifying any kind of war and stuff, and it was like a huge historical mistake. Even if I accept Putin's intention to co-opt Ukraine, it was the worst possible way to go about it. The best possible way is to go neoliberal way, to give them a lot of loans and then basically buy the country. He decided to go the old school way, the worst possible way to do imperialism nowadays. But here's the thing about Ukraine. I can tell that as in my liberal period, I was looking at Ukrainian Maidan. They had two Maidans in 2004 and 2014 as a sign of vibrant democracy, freedom of speech, and the people not putting up with any kind of dictatorship. But looking at it right now, I understand that it was always a slow burning civil war between pro-Russian, or rather Russian speaking. It's not pro-Russian, like it gravitates to Russia. It's just territory populated by Russian speaking people and of Russian culture, basically. And the nationalist Western Ukraine. And the problem, of course, project of the nationalist Ukrainian, strictly Ukrainian speaking Ukraine has total right to exist, but it has to be a much smaller country, because there is roughly half of the country that doesn't want to put themselves in this box of Ukrainian culture when they are part of the much bigger and much more rich, at least in this moment, in history culture. So every time, and the problem, nationalists, they are very bad. It's hard to negotiate with nationalists. They want everything. So every time, if they were content with bilingual, bicultural country, Ukraine would be fine. But they always want to make it into a unicultural country. So we see this conflict in a different universe. You could imagine some kind of a conflict going on in Canada, for example. You can see the similar conflict going on in Spain. You can see it England versus Scotland. But difference, of course, it's a rich country. It's deep in the west, so they are protected. Ukraine, on the other hand, was exposed to Russian influence, and Russia capitalized on these conflicts. So the divide inside Ukraine is genuine. But Russia has always been a malevolent force to exploit it, deepen, and exacerbate it. And in short, both sides are wrong in many respects. I mean, Russia is wrong in the sense that it's bigger, it's stronger, so it has more agency, so it carries more responsibility. So doing basically the same nationalist shit as Ukraine, Russia still carries more responsibility because it's more powerful. But Ukraine is not an innocent part in that too.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say nor is any sort of Western powers that got in the way of any. And like, I'm not making definitive claims when I say don't
Exactly.
or like seek diplomacy.
I want to add to that part. I just wanted to continue this. And when you contextualize Russia against the West, it's exactly the opposite dynamic. Again, Russia is wrong in many respects: imperialism, nationalism, aggression. But then when you put it against even bigger body, the collective West and USA, and you understand that their sins are similar. But because collective West and the USA in particular are much stronger, their responsibility is much bigger. So it's like this kind of spiral, like West against Russia, the same dynamic as Russia versus Ukraine, and the same dynamic as Ukraine versus Donbass. So at any level, everyone wrong, everyone nationalist, everyone aggressive. But if you add the factor of the power, you can see who carries more responsibility in each conflict. I mean, Ukraine versus Donbass, the bigger responsibility on Ukrainian side. Russia versus Ukraine, the bigger responsibility on the Russian side, because Russia is much more powerful. But the final boss is still the United States of America.
We had a big, and I'm sure you saw, the Russiagate sort of paranoia following Trump's victory. And, you know, I'm curious your perspective, because my thing is always like, yeah, Russia is almost certainly doing things to influence us. Also, Israel is, and a whole bunch of other countries.
Saudi Arabia is.
Right, exactly. And so, like, you know, I'm curious about, and so, like, I also think that we are doing things to undermine democracy, or at least a development along democratic lines that we don't like in other countries all the time. I also think it's not a cause for, we all agree, it's not a cause for open war to be declared. But I'm just curious about your perspective on like the global influence operations of somebody inside Russia.
From Russia or on Russia?
Either or, whether like our perspective on like how we sort of like,
I mean,
maybe
like we literally have like, you know, elected officials in this country saying, you know, protests against police brutality and saying things like, oh, you know, this is making Putin very happy, or, you know, Putin's plan is working.
Nancy
right?
Pelosi just the other day said that Putin benefits from people who call for a ceasefire in Palestine.
I think you cannot go against the power dynamic that expressed in the economic power. I mean, as a materialist, historic materialist, it's very easy to see where the economic power, where the ultimate power in the relationship. So the idea that the country that have 15 times less GDP than America could have more influence on America than America on this country? No, it's not possible, because look where the money. You can put the money, and it's the same way like 1% have like 50% of your economy, they have 50% of political influence. It also works in Russia the same, it only works in Russia. And it's also true for relationship between the countries. The richer country is more powerful country and have more influence. So Russia tries to do this something. I don't doubt that, but it's more like against American might, American control over discourse that we then can't even notice sometimes, can't even perceive because of capitalist realism and American realism. They are just incomparable. And specifically, Russiagate conspiracy was very funny to me, because I was learning about it in my still late liberal phase. I was watching MSNBC a lot in 2016, 2017. And even from that, I was picking up one curious thing, that all the things that were liberal media attributing to supposed Russian influence on Trump were also working to a T on Saudi connection on Trump. Money connection going from the 90s, shady deals, lobby operations. At some point, Trump was basically working as a PR manager for MBS after the Khashoggi murder. Imagine him doing something similar for Putin. I mean, it would be the end of, I don't know, everything. Every mind will be blown. So every single claim that was made to justify Trump being specially beholden to Putin in any way works for Saudi Arabia, and it's much more pronounced in terms of Saudi Arabia, and no one was making that claim. To me, even when I was watching liberal media almost exclusively, it was very apparent that it's bullshit. And I think to go back to Putin's interview, that was an interesting thought he expressed, that maybe a part of why Russia is still a preferred sparring partner for USA is because you still have agent but still present experts, anti-Russia experts, Kremlin experts, Kremlinology, people who just make their living from competing with Russia.
They need to get back on TV.
A final gig before retiring, yeah.
So basically, they all grew up in the Cold War time, and the people, expert. I can kind of relate to expert community. If they were Kremlinologists in the 80s, what are they gonna do in the 90s and right now, 30 years after USSR fall? So for them, it's paramount to gaslight American public that Russia in any way socialist or communist or wants to restore USSR and all this bullshit, when it's clearly the opposite, and it's restoring Russian Empire in all its former glory as a prison of the nations, and with inequality and religiosity and very, very uneducated populace. So they just need this gig to keep it relevant. And to me, it's honestly not very materialist, but materialist in some sense explanation why having the narratives Trump being Saudi spy, you constantly go with Trump being Moscow spy, besides the fact that all those same connections are ever more apparent with Saudis, and who gave Jared Kushner $2 billion. Definitely not Deripaska.
Yeah. I'm curious what stuck out from you in the interview. There's two parts that I want to ask you about, that where Tucker's sort of questions misaligned with what I think Putin so the first is, Tucker asks him, do you ever think that there's something supernatural acting on the world? And Putin very simply said, no, I think that these are processed. Go ahead.
It was one of my favorite moments of the interview, honestly. I mean, because that was the moment when Tucker went with it was his last attempt to get Putin on his American religious right agenda. I mean, he was trying to do this whole interview. Putin ignored him the whole interview. He railed over his right-wing American agenda to tell about Bogdan Khmelnytsky and stuff. And in the end, when he started to speak about God, he again, no, it's all materialist. Yeah. He also, prior to that, he made a very interesting point. He said, I don't know who drives American politics, who runs America, but basically he alluded to he didn't say it like that, but it sounded to me like he said, basically America is a combination of special interests in a trench coat posing as a state. Well, he didn't say it like that, but he implied that he don't know who runs America, but it's definitely not any single personality or in single party. It's some kind of interest, special interest, but not in conspirological way, but in very materialist way. And
I agree. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to point, I agree 100%. Like, Tucker was trying to bait him into this deep state, simplistic view of American governance. And Tucker, says, well, yes, of course, the intelligence agencies have, a malign influence. But he also, makes some nods to, democracy being, sort of unstable, and you're not sure who's going to win elections and who has the balance of power within the Congress. And also, there are regional governments and different things. It was very interesting that he didn't take the full, how misaligned he is, right? With Tucker's deep state simplicity is not. If it's coming from Putin, he did a good job, I guess, masking it, because that wasn't the understanding that he was presenting.
Well, actually, Putin, in this particular topic, he presented himself as a good historical materialist. I think his KGB education pays off a bit. And this question about the God, do you feel like anything supernatural drives the history and the international processes? And Putin simply says no. On the one hand, I was relieved to hear it because it undercuts many scary theories about Putin. If you remember, maybe you heard it, maybe not, that there was a moment when 2 years ago, before the war in Ukraine, Putin was asked about nuclear war, and he said something like, we don't have to worry about nuclear war. We are all righteous people. We all go to the heaven, and they all go to the hell. And it was a scary moment a bit for me, because is he believing it? Is he like really like evangelical nut who looking forward to the end of the world? And after his response to Tucker that he doesn't see any presence of supernatural in the world, how it's been run, I sighed with relief. I never believed in Putin being really that religious and stuff. He always struck me as a person who doesn't believe in anything, and that's why he went to the lowest possible way of accumulating wealth and power, because there is no other ideology in him. But when he just rebutted Carlson this way, I was kind of relieved. I do believe he's a secular guy. He's very materialist guy. He still, maybe in some warped way, remembers and keeps with him his materialist education from Soviet time. But I also was immensely frustrated with him, because my second thought was, why do you implement this religious fascist crap on us for? Because it's very frustrating. I mean, just as the war started, one of the first laws Putin implemented was in summer 2022 was anti-gay law, basically against gay propaganda, basically expressing that you are gay in Russia to every age and every public set becomes illegal. So basically, me living as an open gay and presented in any fashion public, it becomes gay propaganda, being myself. So basically, I was first put in the category of second-class citizen. It happened 18 months ago. And 2 months ago, they accelerated it, and Russian Supreme Court released the decision that LGBT movement, LGBT organization, LGBT symbolism is extremist organization. So if you associate yourself publicly with LGBT organization, which doesn't exist, so everything LGBT in the eyes of the police, of the state, of the court, so whatever they think ties you to LGBT in any way, like rainbow pin on your short or whatever, or rainbow in your picture, whatever, it make you an extremist. And after that, there is no much room to escalation, but because you have like regular criminals, then goes extremists, it's a political category, and then goes terrorists. So there is no much escalation left, and the only way to escalate religious fundamentalist reactionarism in Russia is to criminalize homosexuality as it is. So basically return us 30 years ago, and it all plus Russia goes in the same way as America in terms of prohibition abortion. It basically prohibited trans people, trans identity, and it's even harder than gay identity. So, and I'm looking at this reactionary crap that going on, how religious being pushed everywhere in every facet of our lives to the detriment of education, science, and social cohesion. And it's all done by a person who doesn't believe in any of that. Except one thing, he believes, I'm pretty sure he believes in utility of it to control the unwashed masses. So he's been a secular person, he's been a rational person, he uses this bullshit for a very rational end to control the unwashed and educated masses. And turning masses in the unwashed and uneducated by destroying public education and science. Also the part of this plan. So basically Russian populace was and still is very educated by the average world standard, but it goes away because if you need, you don't need much if you're restoring Russian Empire. Russian Empire was 80% illiterate and very religious, and we're going this way, but it just seems to me that more insidious because it's being done extremely cynically by a person who doesn't believe any of that. It's a hopeful sign in terms of international relationship that he's ultimately a rational person and you can rationally interact with him. But it's just insulting and very infuriating in terms of his relationship with his own people.
That reactionary drift, do you think that is something that will be arrested either post Putin? What do you think the outlook is on Russian society and acceptance and on these lines?
I honestly can't tell because I'm trying to be materialist about it, and there is no other reason to stop the reactionary drift, but with having a progressive counterforce. And we started from there, that there is no progressive counterforce in Russia right now. There is a liberal counterforce. It mainly crashed and it ultimately reactionary too. So basically it's like they all hate Putin, Putinism, everything but Putin, except when they present it with any left alternative. And then they like, Daddy Putin, save us from communists, save us from that. There is nothing to save them from right now because there is no viable left alternative in Russia yet. So they are like, yeah, we are against Putin, but it only because there is no left alternative. If there was a left alternative, you would see them asking Putin police to crush left dissent. So before we have this progressive left movement, before this birthing worker movement meets itself with ideological people and embraces socialist ideology instead of avoiding it or running from it, before it happens, the drift to the right continues for the simple reason because there is nothing to counter it with. That's how I see it.
And one other thing is Tucker, I think, wanted to tee up Putin with why is America so concerned about you when they should be concerned about China? And Putin is like, well, I think they are very concerned about China, in fact. I'm curious about that element, the China element, if you had any observations on that.
Actually, this was one of the glorious moments of this interview that I liked very much because, framing that Tucker started it with like, yeah, like America is bad, I all understand it, but China is worse, more ruthless, more cynical. Just appreciate the racism of it. Because he was speaking like, yeah, we're bad, but we are human. They are inhuman totally. They have no human empathy. They have no human feelings. They just scheming animals, like, there's insects from the Starship Troopers. I truly believe that Americans, especially on the right, but liberals too, see the China as a different planets where this collective herd mind of insects plotting against our planet. Like, you saw Starship Troopers, right? You understand the reference. And in Tucker's question, in this framing, this dehumanization of China was inherent to the framing of the question. And Putin just cut him off. He said, look at the China history, look at the China policy, they are not aggressive. You're more aggressive. And I think it was a glorious rebuttal. I have no notes. Putin did a good job, unironically, ruining Tucker's racist anti-China narrative with because again this delusion is omnipresent on the West, especially on the Western right, liberals and stuff, that yes, we are bad, but those Muslims, those Arabs, those Chinese, they are even worse than us because look, at least we are human. They are not entirely human, they are inhuman, ahuman. And Putin says basically, no, they are actually human. They're actually more human than you in many respects. It's just you don't see their humanity. I think it fell flat on Tucker's ears completely, but to me it was absolutely glorious and the moment that was I completely agree, find myself in agreement with Putin, which is a rare occasion.
Well, it's just like one thing that is so clear about a lot of these kind of like anti-war right wingers in America. And I put, anti-war in quotes because it's very clear that whenever they're sort of upset about a conflict or might want to see a conflict be de-escalated, it's not because they've become, doves or peace-loving hippies. It's because they think that we should be prosecuting war and conflict against different people. Same thing with Tulsi Gabbard, Tucker Carlson, very much so. It was a very interesting part of the interview for sure.
They actually the only part of the American establishment that responds to the initial Putin request from the West that Putin basically, and I think we didn't talk about it yet, but Putin was speaking a lot how, starting from this moment when they sold US for the becoming part of the bourgeois Western civilization, and they wanted basically their old place prior to 1917 back. And as Hassan actually put it quite succinctly, that Putin's Russia wanted to become to America what Israel is to America. So being a client state, backing USA in their endeavors, being backed by USA, and having the right to do with impunity whatever they want in their part of the world, which is post-Soviet territory. And the American right, when they say that we don't need to support Ukraine and we need to leave Russia to their own devices, they basically accept this premise. It's not like they are anti-war. They just say, okay, we accept Russia back in our like little club of Western empires, and it comes with the right to do what they want on their own borders.
Yeah, and just to any other parts of the interview you wanted to comment on before we move on?
Well, I actually maybe elaborate on this part of Putin's history. Yeah, two important things. First, his history with America. It was very informative to me to hear his history of his relationship with American presidents, with CIA, how they interacted. Maybe something I think, or I didn't hear about it before, or maybe he actually broke some news, speaking how, for example, he asked American president to stop meddling in the Northern Caucasus and support Islamist separatists there, and the CIA just answered, no, we won't. And it sounded to me like a breaking news. Maybe it was public before, I didn't know, but I didn't know about that. That it was directly, they directly addressed this question, and Americans directly said, no, we continue to meddle. I mean, it's insane, and I totally believe it happened. He actually said many interesting things about the past, like when Tucker, the best question from Tucker was when he pushed Putin on the question, would you ultimately join the NATO if the conditions were right? And Putin said yes, if the conditions were right, we get some respect, some recognition as a former Western empire restored. Didn't say that exactly, but that's what he meant. We would join NATO, we would join that club of empires that existed 150 years ago. So if you go back in history in 20 years, you'll see that Russia was doing a lot. It was actually casting itself on the role of Israel against along the lines of fighting the Islamist extremism, by the way. There was a joint project of anti-missile defense. It will cover Russia, Europe, and America against Iran. Right now, Iran is the biggest friend and ally of Russia. But 20 years ago, Putin was using Iran as his basically negotiation, how we could join our forces against who. Let's do the Islamist countries our common enemy. He was the first to call Bush after 9/11. He provided NATO with a base in Ulyanovsk air base when they invaded Afghanistan. There were a lot of material and very real signs that Putin basically was extremely pro-Western, and he was looking to become a part of the NATO, part of maybe EU, definitely a part of the special relations with the US club, and he was rebutted on every step. He didn't get any of the respect. He didn't get any of the material benefits he was looking for. And when he directly asked small concessions like stop fueling Islamist separatism on our southern regions, he was directly said no, despite the fact that Bush was ready to hear them. CIA said no. So this turn to anti-American position, it's a basically it's Korn. It's a person that was upset and insulted by the constant rejection. He wanted to become what America or Israel is on his part in the world. He was rejected and he went alone and he found new friends, but he's still basically imperialist and he actually very, very Western-minded, but not progressive West, but more like historic reactionary imperialist West, but still very much Western-minded person.
I suppose if I had to explain why America didn't extend more of a hand to friendship, as Putin put it, following the collapse of the USSR, it would be something along the lines of military-industrial complications. I'm curious if you have any perspective or idea on that.
Oh, yes.
Why we didn't.
Yes. I see. This is where his idealism and his fantasy view of history basically fooled him. Because he constructed this narrative like we were Western powers, Western empires, we controlled the world. I don't know exactly what is his justification. Is it genetic? Is it because of race? Is it because of religion? But anyway, it's some kind of idealist crap. So we are the selected few of the nations that rule the world. We are empires, and it's supposed to be like that forever because it's supposed to be like that. No explanation further needed. So he thought that this Russia, for some reason, like went away. Russian Empire went away for 70 years. Now we are back. We're supposed to be accepted because it's our destiny. Whereas if he was remembering his historical materialism training a little bit, he would realize that whatever we had in 19th century, it was a result of economic development, economic interest. And once Russia lost its place at the table, there is no material economic reason to just cut their share back. Because American corporations, American oligarchs, Western oligarchs, they already took all the places, all the seats at the table. And Putin romantically, idealistically thinks, well, we are back, guys, give us our previous small but noble part at the table. No, we took it. It's ours. We use it, and we still need to expand. We need more markets. We need more expansion. We need more conquest, and so on and so on. So whatever you get, you should fight for it yourself. Competitive. It's a competition. It's that. So Putin idealistically expected to be welcomed back to the table because he saw it as a concert of the nations, Western nations, and he saw it as in a historical view. And Americans would never do that because why would they? America and the West itself, they are driven by their own material interests, as Russia actually does. I mean, why would Putin want to be back at the table? He wanted his material share of the economic wealth of the world, so he might be not realizing it, but he wanted it for material reasons. For the same material reasons, no one would let him back. Just give the big part, piece of the pie. So here is that. So his historical view is why he failed in understanding American politics and why he couldn't get and still probably don't understand why he was rejected at every step.
Interesting, yeah. And finally, nonetheless, I think not in a horrible position. So I don't like to comment too much on the status of wars and on armies because, I'm not a military expert. But overall, my gloss seems to be like he's in a better position than Ukraine would like. And especially when you look at the American politics angle of it. I mean, post October 7th and America supporting Gaza, like any international pressure that America could bring to bear against Russia seems to be out the window, at least in terms of like moral grounds. But I'm curious, like, do you have any forecast for this conflict?
I can tell two things. First, in terms of forecast, yes, I'll tell you a bit later. But the more important thing from this interview, in my view, Putin was very insistent that he actually wants to negotiate right now. He said it many times. There is a decree signed by Zelensky. I don't know why he did it, but he basically prohibited himself from negotiating with Russia. His high point when he thought that it will be possible to push Russia back to the 1991 borders. Mm-hmm. So and then you can negotiate basically the end of the war when you win it. But there is no win the war for Ukraine. It doesn't seem so. I mean, there is like unlikely scenario, but in terms of possible forecast, most likely nothing shows that even with this 61 billion package goes through, there is no ultimately winning the war for Ukraine. Not in terms of full win with Crimea and Donbass back under Kiev control, and it was a silly decree, and Putin multiple times over the course of many questions, not a single question from Tucker Carlson, said you should cancel this decree and go back to the negotiation table. And he even said that there is possible a way to frame this peace between our countries in a way that will be decent to you. He said it. He literally said it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said directly. And it was kind of funny, but also revealing, because people in America will always speak about off-ramp for Putin, meaning that how he can accept his defeat gracefully. And Putin says, well, we are actually open in terms of off-ramp for Zelensky. So we actually open to negotiating the end of the war the way that will not be looking. I mean, he didn't say it, but he implied it heavily. You can look back to the interview, as I interpreted, and I think he was not direct but very clear in this intent that we are open to negotiate the end of the war in a way that won't be humiliating defeat that ends Ukraine at all, or even a Zelensky presidency at all. And as some Ukrainians said, Putin mentioned Istanbul negotiations, and he confirmed its reality, that it was the biggest part about Istanbul negotiations. The biggest question about them was not that it was happening and how serious Ukraine was before Boris Johnson arrived, but how serious Russia was about it. Was it a ruse, or was it a genuine attempt to end the war that started badly, and definitely not the way that Putin expected? He did not expect the war, that's for sure. He expected special military operation and quick regime change in a matter of weeks. He did not expect. He was let down by his intelligence and his delusions and stuff, but he definitely wasn't prepared for war, wasn't expecting, and was prepared to end it swiftly through Istanbul negotiations. And so first he confirmed that he was serious about it and put the blame on Ukraine. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but still he was serious about it. And as some Ukrainian commentators said, the conditions of the Istanbul, Ukraine won't get, obviously, because it was 2 years ago, and it was included Russia pulling back its forces to the borders of Donbass and Crimea, or even further, and even put the future of Crimea on the table. Like in 15 years, we will discuss it again. There was this condition. So obviously, in this situation on the front, they won't get this option. But now, as I'm quoting this Ukrainian commentator, they can get formula, it's his interpretation, and I just subscribe for it, Istanbul plus 4 oblasts. So these 4 oblasts of southern Ukraine that Russia occupied, it's Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donbass, and Lugansk, Donetsk and Lugansk, they are formally the part of Russia. So I don't think Putin want to give up them. But besides those oblasts, Ukrainian neutrality is basically those 2 conditions, keeping the territory he already conquered, plus Ukrainian neutrality, would be, as we can infer from what Putin said, acceptable negotiating position, bargaining for him right now. So basically, he said he wants to negotiate. He understands the importance of the off-ramp for Ukraine, so it wouldn't be, so he doesn't demand a total defeat, and probably understands that he couldn't get a total defeat from Ukraine. And we can infer that his demands probably will be Istanbul plus 4 oblasts, basically a status quo. And for me, in terms of what I can predict about the future, what I can see the future holds for us, this is the second best moment to negotiate after Istanbul. I mean, Istanbul would be the best. We will have this war over 2 years ago. It will be just played, they would just blade the sync packs, put the meat back in the grinder, and it will be over. I mean, it couldn't be over because of the Western influence, but if it wasn't for that, I do believe that Putin recognized his military mistake, that he got himself into war instead of special military operation immediately, and he was prepared to go back. Right now, it's the second best. I mean, it's bad if you want to see Ukraine restored in full border, but again, you should accept it, the 2 years ago negotiations. Right now, it's maybe not the best option, but it's the best that Ukraine will gonna get, because in a year or two from now, the next negotiation option will be even worse. And in terms of predictions, I see 3 scenarios. The first scenario is possible if America won't follow through with this package and first ammo and money, but most importantly ammo, the collapse of the front is entirely possible this year, and then it's basically Ukraine will have to probably capitulate. Well, it's a bad scenario for Ukraine, let's say, and it's entirely possible, and it's totally dependent on your domestic calculations and your domestic whatever going on in the Congress. The second option, I want to say it's not a case for the $61 billion to Ukraine at all, because the second option, if those money will go to Ukraine and this ammo will go to Ukraine, I think it's kind of even worse. Definitely not the better, because America, it doesn't seem that America wants to crush Russia in this war. Because they understand. I mean, America holds enough arms to basically, if they supply to Ukraine their full wish list, the way they supply the full wish list to Israel, they would probably be able to crush Russian front, to make Russian front collapse and create even a crisis within Russia. But then instead of the crisis the size of Ukraine, you would have the crisis the size of Russia. And Russia borders Northern Korea, Russia borders China, Russia borders, almost borders Iran, Russia borders Europe. So imagine the chain effect of Russian collapse. So America, even if they follow through with the money, they will never give Ukraine enough money and ammo to defeat Russia. They will only prolong this brutal slaughter on the front lines. And Ukraine already sees the end of their manpower. They are prepared to, they're starting this 500,000 people mobilization, and there are all the signs that they won't be able to fulfill it, because first it's very expensive and they don't have the money. But even if they get the money from America, it might cause them huge domestic crisis, because it's mobilization is a huge problem right now in Ukraine. There is no volunteers left, and there is very much people against people who are not already on the front lines, don't want to get there at any cost. There is a lot of street fights against military police who tries to find people who are avoiding draft. And if they try, this country of 30 million people, after the 10 million left for Europe, if they will try to follow through with American money to mobilize 500,000 people more, it might cause them domestic crisis that will ruin their ruin Zelensky regime. But even if they get the money, they get the ammo, they mobilize 500,000 people, the American won't give them enough ammo to defeat Russia. So we will have just 2 years of this meat grinder, where this 500,000 people will be murdered or disabled too. And in 2 years, 2 more years, we will have the same situation, but Ukraine have no people to mobilize. Even if America give them all the money, all the ammo in the world, they have bought themselves 2 more years, killed many Russians, killed many their own people, and they still have to end this war because they have no one to mobilize. So what I'm saying is that the second scenario, if first scenario is bad for Ukraine, if the help doesn't go through and the fronts collapse, it means defeat. The second scenario, if the help comes through, but in this limited fashion like it's going on right now, is probably even worse, because they end up the same place, but 2 years later and 500,000 more deaths later. And not to mention all the Russian deaths on this war. And the third scenario, the hope scenario for Ukraine and for the West, that something breaks in Russia first. And it's not an impossible scenario. But again, this is a scenario that America itself doesn't want, because how deep will be this breakup? They were scared enough of the Prigozhin mutiny. It was a silly coup, but it was still an attempt in mutiny. Imagine if Russia falls apart like the Soviet Union did. How many conflicts all over Eurasia it will ignite. Plus 5,000 nukes losing control. So the third scenario, the hope that something breaks in Russia first, is possible. Everything is possible. It's definitely true in this moment, historical. But that's not the scenario America itself wants. And it doesn't seem to be likely, because Russia has more people and Putin holds his grip on power. So in terms of more likely scenarios, you have like either a quick defeat in the war for Ukraine, or prolonged destruction of everybody in this war and still defeat. And from these 3 options, I prefer the fourth, negotiations and the war. But I don't hold any hope, because I think that the modus operandi of neoliberal regimes on the West is impotence. Violent impotence. So they will let play out one of the worst possible scenarios, but they won't take any responsibility for any action to actually negotiate the peace, because it's not even the peace the problem between Russia and Ukraine. It's the world order is the problem. World security architecture, because we have lost the security architecture that kept the peace in Europe after the Second World War II. It was actually lost between 1989 and 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and Yugoslavian war started. So we were in denial about that for 30 years, and this is the price of the denial, that the previous safety architecture that kept largely world peace, especially in Europe, it was standing on 2 columns on this conflict between Soviet bloc and American bloc. Without Soviet bloc, this balance, however dangerous it was lost. America went completely unhinged as a world superpower, doing whatever they want, cooing whatever they want, speaking about regime change in any country they want, like they are talking about changing of their clothes. And we need, strategically speaking, we need a new security architecture, global security architecture. And when I'm talking about negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, I'm not talking about ending this particular war. I'm talking about recognition that this war is just the latest breakup in the world order that doesn't exist anymore. And we need to create some kind of new security architecture that will include everyone, not exclude half of the world like NATO does. It include Russia, include North Korea, include China, include Brazil, include good countries, include bad countries, include whatever people you like, whatever people you don't like, everyone who has a real stake and power on the world stage. And when we negotiate it, the world will become better, and we not only end this war, we will prevent other wars. But there is no force on the West, in the current neoliberal leadership West, to even attempt to think like that.
Yeah.
And probably they understand what the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine implies. That implies this big conversation that cancels the end of history and actually demands the new security architecture for the world. And understanding this, they would prefer the world burn than to act on it, because it's not a task that they are capable of doing, I think, I'm afraid.
Is that your interpretation of the Boris Johnson veto, that they were concerned about these sorts of avenues being, or these sorts of, diplomatic muscles being developed? Because now, after a couple of years and hundreds of thousands of people dead and loss of leverage in negotiations, that seems like a massive blunder. And I don't see a lot of... Yeah, go ahead.
I honestly think it was more mindless than that. I don't think he was afraid of this huge task of the creating of the new global security architecture. He doesn't seem like the guy who would be understanding these things. He was just acting like old school imperialist, like his counterpart Putin does in his old school imperialist way, or like Biden does when he seen what happening in Gaza. And how the Middle East starting to rising up, what he does, he just sends aircraft carriers. Why? And they didn't do anything, by the way. They just went there, stand there for a while, just give a few headlines, and went back. Because what would they do? What they were supposed to do? It's just a mindless action of people who have no direction and no understanding of the world they are in, and the historical moment and their historical responsibility. They have their tools, the hammers, and they apply them. They think if we have this huge and monstrous aircraft carriers and we send them, it will do magic. Boris Johnson did his magic. He thought he thought it like again 1853 when there was the previous Crimean War, when France and Britain defeated Russia. Basically, he thought maybe it is again this moment, and as well as Biden thinks with his magical thinking that American aircraft carriers and his spell casting via America, we can finance the wars at once, will make any difference. It's just a magical thinking of the people who live in the 19th century, and they are no different than Putin. They remember those days of glory of their countries. They want to restore it without any understanding. So I think it was a mindless action of the people who are wholly incompetent and unqualified for the current moment. And who will sleepwalk us into destruction.
No shit. And it's funny, say Putin's historical lesson. Bibi Netanyahu does similar sort of, we're going to go take it way back. One final thing I did want to ask you about that concerned me about Putin, and actually it concerned Tucker Carlson, but I think I was concerned for different reasons than Tucker, is when Putin said, I'm not satisfied with the denazification efforts. And I'm curious about his sort of reservation there. Is that something he's going to say okay, I'll let you keep the Nazis if you give us this territory? Or what Putin's denazification emphasis, how do you interpret that?
Maybe I didn't hear you correctly, but because as I understand this interview, he actually kind of diminished, downplayed the denazification part. He just said that you don't have to have open Nazi organizations and stuff. So basically, as I understood it, I didn't pay that much of attention to this.
So I don't think that's entirely off. I think he did say yes, actually we've worked on these things prior, but he said it as Tucker's so you've accomplished your goals, and he said no, not regards to denazification. But I know what you mean in the sense that he said, like, actually, this is a solvable issue that we can work with. But yeah, that was just the last thing that kind of stuck out to me.
I can tell. I honestly don't know. Like on the other issues, I more or less understand Putin positions and confident in my interpretation. But in terms of denazification, I'm still not sure what he means, because it sounds a bit esoteric for me. And he showed himself as a rational guy. I mean, he deluded for sure, in many respects. But within his like worldview, as he has it, he's a quite rational guy, and this denazification thing seems oddly esoteric. Like, what does he mean? So if you accept this rational Putin framing, again, within his deluded worldview, he's rational actor. My best interpretation would be just ban organizations that directly praise Bandera and Petlura and people like that, ban Azov brigade and stuff, and it will be it. What else can he mean? That's my understanding from the interview. What else can he mean by that? I frankly don't know. I mean, it's this part is still very esoteric for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that our parliaments could do is stop applauding, Nazis.
Would be nice.
Egor Kotkin, where can people follow you?
Follow me on Twitter. Basically, it's where I'm present. And you can find me on YouTube. Also, Egor Kotkin at Egor Kotkin as Twitter. I'm not posting any content there yet, but my interviews I upload there. And maybe I'll start eventually doing something there. So you can subscribe me. It costs you nothing. But mainly I'm active on Twitter and nowhere else, because I'm very much cut off from the American services as Substack and Patreon.
Right. Well, Egor, thank you so much, and thank you for staying up late with us.
Yes.
I really appreciate talking to you, man.
Oh, it was very, very interesting to talk to you. I'm happy to share my thoughts, and I think it's important for Americans, or at least for your audience, to hear a Russian perspective that doesn't come from Putin or from Russian liberals in the position. Both the positions are equally deranged.
100%.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, folks. Enjoyed very much talking to Egor.
No, really, it was a pleasure.
Could have honestly, there's like 4 questions I'm like, I meant to ask, and then we just didn't get to it, and it's like,
I mean,
it's an hour and 7
the thing
minutes.
is, like, we
Folks,
made that decision like 4 times.
Sorry.
Yeah, keep going.
I was just gonna say, we have expanded our sort of infrastructure electronically, so we could bring you a full hour-long interview like that, because actually we're limited to an hour. But yeah, I mean, it was such a great conversation. But go ahead, David.
Oh no, I was just gushing too. I was just saying, I feel like we made that executive decision like 3 or 4 times in the interview to keep it going.
Yeah,
because there's still more we want to get to. So yeah, really appreciate that. Hope y'all did as well.
Folks, appreciate all the that frickin' Joe Rogan. I know we've said it, but the free speech guy, and all of a sudden he's just grubbing, just snatching up those little monetization funds. Just grubbing his little, his eyes bulging. Here's another $100 on top of my $250 million. Please put that into On It Enterprises or whatever the fuck. Sorry, I'm a little bit annoyed, but thank you to everybody who has become members or super chatted or even just subscribed in the wake of our being oppressed by this corporate behemoth. It's the corporate behemoths, folks. They don't like the little guy to be having great conversations.
Well, speaking about great conversations, they're not over. We're about to be jumping over the postgame patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be taking some of y'all's questions and discords. But also, we got a little bit of a preview of a very important conversation of some big brain folks that we're keeping a surprise for Matt Leck. And definitely want to see him see what one of his biggest fans is up to right now. We also have a little bit of an in-depth segment coming for y'all on none other than Sam Harris, somebody who speaks slowly and in a boring, monotone voice, but is just whispering some of the most genocidal and racist rhetoric. And this one, even for him, I have to say, truly surprised me. So that's coming up in the post game.
Is this in conversation with our boy David Pakman?
You know what? I felt that it wouldn't even be fair to bring this one to do that one. This one is in-depth, pure Harris, and a good reminder of who David Pakman is rubbing elbows with. So y'all will want to join us for that.
I apologize to any Harrises out there in the audience because it's a rough time because of a combination of words, pure Harris. You either think Sam Harris or you think Kamala Harris, and neither one of those is like not a great time to be mainlining Harris. I'm trying to think. I can't even think of all the good Harrises. I'm trying to think of sports Harrises. Who are the Harrises? I'm blanking.
The casino. I don't know.
It's all obscured by Harrises.
Yeah, so stand up for your name, good Harrises out there. But folks, you'll want to join us for that. Patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be having a lot of fun there. So come by. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.
Peace.